He walked away from a 20-year corporate career, drove alone into one of America's most struggling cities, and started cleaning up strangers' properties, completely free. That's a story people think they know. But one afternoon in Detroit, Sean Stockman was alone on a property when something happened that stopped him cold. In his own words, it could have dramatically changed his life. He posted about it, still visibly shaken. And here's what makes that moment so striking. It wasn't a turning point. It was just a Tuesday. Just another day in a life Sean Stockman built by walking away from everything safe. And the story of how he got there is far more complicated than a before and after thumbnail. The secret his bosses kept for years. His bosses at his corporate job knew he was slowly fading, and instead of pushing him harder, they pulled him aside and said something nobody expected. For nearly 2 decades, Sean Stockman showed up to a job that looked successful on paper. He worked in the automotive industry in Michigan, a career he'd built from scratch after getting married young and starting a family young. From the outside, it looked like he had it figured out. Steady paycheck, a title, a trajectory, everything you're supposed to want. But here's the part that never quite makes it into the highlight reel. Sean was drowning in imposter syndrome. Not occasionally, consistently. Despite 2 decades of showing up and proving himself, he couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong. That quiet voice, the one that whispers, "Am I actually good enough?" never went quiet. It just got louder the longer he stayed. Before the automotive industry, Sean had worked as a video editor. Not corporate content, wedding videos. He spent years capturing other people's most joyful days on camera, while his own life felt increasingly flat. He had the equipment, the skill, and the paycheck, and he was suffocating. What does that look like from the outside? It looks like a man doing the minimum at a job he used to care about. It looks like someone who lights up on weekends and visibly fades during the work week. It looks like existing inside what Sean himself calls a box, not surviving, not thriving, just existing inside a structure that no longer fits. But here's the detail most retellings of this story leave out. His bosses noticed. They watched him. They saw the creative work he was producing outside of office hours, the energy, the engagement, the obvious gap between who he was on the weekends and who he was Monday through Friday. And instead of writing him up or pushing him to perform better, they pulled him aside. What they said next is a kind of thing that either sets you free or terrifies you, depending on where you're standing. They told him, "You've got something here. You should pursue it." That single conversation didn't immediately change everything. Sean didn't walk out the door that afternoon and reinvent his life. But something cracked open. He'd spent 20 years waiting for permission from the inside, and it came from the outside instead. The creative energy that his corporate job had been slowly starving. It was coming out through the work he was doing on his own time. And for the first time, someone with authority in his world was saying, "Follow that." What he chose to follow it toward is something he couldn't have predicted. And the place he ended up, Detroit, of all places, wasn't a destination he planned. It was a result of one afternoon, one decision, and one abandoned preschool he couldn't bring himself to drive past. The abandoned preschool that started everything. Most people, when they see something broken on the side of the road, slow down, feel something like sadness, and keep driving. Sean Stockman got out of his car. He was 41 years old when it happened. 41, which matters, because that's not the age when people typically blow up their lives and start over. That's the age when most people have decided they've already made their choices and they're living with them. Sean was driving through Detroit when he passed an abandoned preschool. The grounds were completely overtaken, weeds swallowing the sidewalks, overgrowth everywhere, the whole property wearing the look of a city that had stopped paying attention. Nobody had cared for it in a long time. It looked exactly the way a lot of Detroit looks, like something that used to matter and got left behind. Most people would have slowed down, registered something like sadness, and kept going. Sean pulled over. He walked up to that property with no camera, no audience, no plan, and no expectation that this would become anything other than what it was in that moment. A man who couldn't look away from something broken. He started pulling weeds with his bare hands. That one afternoon turned into a mission. The mission turned into a channel. The channel, Midlife Stockman, eventually grew to nearly 1 million subscribers and racked up over 140 million views. Sean became known locally as Detroit's Mr. Clean. But none of that was a plan. The plan was just to not drive past something broken without doing something about it. Here's what the inspirational version of this story usually skips. When Sean decided to leave corporate America and do this full-time, he had never been self-employed. Not once in his entire adult life. 20 years in the system, and then no system. No paycheck arriving on schedule. No title. No structure. Just faith that this was the right move, and the support of his wife, Tessa, and a small group of close friends who believed in him enough to say keep going. He describes that first leap into self-employment for exactly what it was: terrifying, not exhilarating. Terrifying. Tessa's role in this matters more than the channel often shows. Behind every video of Sean working in 90-degree heat is a partnership that made it possible. She didn't support the idea in theory. She backed it when it was just a guy with a mower and a belief that this was what he was supposed to be doing. The channel's name isn't accidental. Sean was 41 at that preschool. What most people call a midlife crisis, he calls a midlife mission. But those two phrases aren't as different as they sound. Because what came next in Detroit was not clean, not tidy, and not safe. It was dangerous in ways nobody fully warned him about. What Detroit doesn't warn you about. If you only watch the transformation videos on Midlife Stockman, you'd think Sean's work looks something like deeply satisfying manual labor. What the thumbnails don't show is the part where strangers call the cops on him, while he's actively helping someone who asks for help. Working alone in Detroit means working in a city that has been burned, abandoned, and overlooked enough times that even generosity can look suspicious. Sean learned this quickly. Angry neighbors had confronted him mid-cleanup. He has been reported for trespassing while helping a family who wanted him there. Police have been called, not by him, but on him. There was one incident in particular that Sean calls the most memorable moment of his life. Officers had to physically intervene while he was in the middle of a transformation. Picture that. You're covered in sweat. You've been working for hours on a property you're cleaning for free, and you're standing in front of police explaining why you're not the threat here. His handled moments like these with a kind of steady patience that is either impressive or quietly heartbreaking depending on how you look at it. In one video, he pauses mid-job as a neighbor circles a block trying to file a complaint. He looks at the camera almost calmly. This property may not be worth it. The guy is running all over the neighborhood trying to complain. The city asked me to come here, so we'll see what the cops say. That calm is earned, not natural. It comes from doing this enough times to understand that some people have been let down by outsiders showing up in their neighborhood so many times that kindness doesn't read as kindness immediately. It reads as a setup. And the same impulse that makes Sean help strangers is the impulse that makes strangers suspicious. You can't separate those things. They are the same thing. But the confrontations are only half of what makes this work hard. The other half is purely physical. Sean has worked in 90-degree heat with a shovel, transforming properties that most people wouldn't step foot on. Some cleanups run close to 3 full days, multiple tool changes, multiple cases of water, every piece of equipment pushed to its limit. This is a 43-year-old man grinding his body through conditions that would stop most people before lunch. Property after property. Month after month. And then there was the afternoon that hit differently from all of them. Sean was alone on a Detroit property, a routine cleanup, nothing to suggest anything would go wrong, when something did. He posted about it afterward, still visibly shaken. Said he was standing there filming, feeling very thankful to be okay. That it was a real scary moment. That it could have dramatically changed his life. He called it his closest call yet. He kept working the next day. He went back, and the cameras never fully captured how much that cost him. The faces he can't forget. For every property Sean transforms, there's a face. And some of those faces are the kind that stay with you long after the grass is cut and the camera is packed away. There was a woman in Detroit who had been praying. Literally praying. Sean showed up at her property unannounced, and when she realized what he was there to do, that a stranger had driven to her home with equipment and was offering to help her for free, she broke down completely. Through tears, she told him, "I've been praying for somebody to come help me." Think about the weight of that sentence. Not hoping, not wishing, praying. There was a person in this city sitting inside her home, looking at a yard she couldn't manage, and her only option felt like prayer. And then one day the help actually came. That pattern plays out again and again in Sean's work, but each time with new details that say something different about the community he's working in. There was Linda, 58 years old. disabled, hard of hearing, living with cerebral palsy that affected her speech, her balance, and her ability to walk without a walker. Her backyard had become completely unmanageable, not through neglect, but through circumstance. The overgrowth wasn't a choice. It was what happens when someone has no way to address something and no clear path to getting help. Sean got her story through an email. He showed up. He spent days on that yard. And what he gave back wasn't just a clean property. It was her ability to feel at home in her own home. There was a single mother whose yard had become actively dangerous for her children. Not just overgrown, hazardous. The kind of space where kids can't safely play. When Sean finished that cleanup, he didn't just return a yard. He gave those kids somewhere to be kids. There was a veteran whose property had spiraled out of control, not from laziness or indifference, but from the relentless accumulation of difficulty that doesn't pause because your lawn needs mowing. Sean showed up and handled it without making it a bigger thing than it needed to be. And then there was a woman named Erin, who answered her door on a Monday in July to find Sean standing on her porch in 90-degree heat with a shovel. She thought he was selling cable. Verizon, maybe DirecTV, some guy at the door with an angle. When she understood what was actually happening, her face changed completely. "I have been waiting for this day," she told him. After the cleanup was done, Sean said he used just about every tool he owned on that property. He said it looked so good, said it was so satisfying to watch. What's easy to miss inside each of these stories is the emotional weight Sean carries out of them. He doesn't just clean yards and drive away clean. He absorbs these situations. The woman who was praying, the 58-year-old with a walker, the veteran, the kids. Each story doesn't end when the truck pulls away. It stays. And over years, it accumulates into something that no amount of ad revenue or subscriber growth can address. And that accumulation is quietly building toward a cost that this story hasn't fully reckoned with yet. The house that almost broke him. Sean has documented a lot of painful properties, but there is one specific home in Detroit that stands apart from everything else is shown. Because this wasn't just an overgrown yard or a property in disrepair. This house was nearly condemned, and a family was still living inside it. Let that settle. A home so deteriorated it was close to being declared unfit for human habitation, and people were still calling it home because they had nowhere else to go. Sean documented it. He showed up with his camera and his tools, and he documented it not to exploit the situation, but because he understands that part of this work is bearing witness, showing the people who live outside these neighborhoods what is actually happening inside them, making visible what the city would rather not see. What the footage captured is what happens when life overwhelms people so completely that maintaining a home becomes impossible. When illness stacks on top of poverty, stacks on top of years of being overlooked, until the walls around you start to reflect the weight of everything that has gone wrong. The house stops being just a house. It becomes a mirror of the struggle inside it. What do you do when you're trying to survive inside something that's falling apart? You wait. You hold on. You try not to think about how close to the edge you are. And you hope that someone notices before it gets worse. Sean noticed. He showed up. He worked. But here's the thing about a home like that. You can clean a yard in a day. You can transform a property over a weekend. You cannot fix what led to a home being nearly condemned. You cannot undo the illness, the poverty, the years of being invisible to the systems that were supposed to help. You can make the outside look like someone cares. And then you have to leave. And the family goes back inside. And the walls are still what they are. Sean has talked about this honestly, that work like this takes something out of you, that the emotional labor of absorbing others